This is a standard payroll statement. You already know the disappointment of your earnings shrinking after deductions. Look at these specific line items. You'll find mandatory payroll taxes like FICA, collected to fund social programs like Medicare and Social Security. There is a comforting piece of legal design attached to this tax. By law, the burden is split exactly evenly. The employee pays half out of their paycheck, and the employer pays the other half out of their revenue. The political intent is straightforward. Lawmakers designed this 50-50 split to protect workers, ensuring employees wouldn't carry the full weight of funding massive national programs. But there is a catch. Can a law written on a piece of paper actually dictate where the money ultimately comes from? In economics, the physical act of handing money over to the government is entirely disconnected from who actually suffers the financial loss. Trusting the exact wording of a tax law creates an illusion of fairness, but it blinds us to the reality of how the market operates. To understand why, let's step away from complex labor laws and look at a simple, everyday transaction, buying an ice cream cone. Imagine the local government decides to levy a strict 50-cent tax on every single ice cream cone sold in the city. The law might state that the customer has to pay that extra 50 cents out of pocket at the register, or it might require the shop owner to pay it out of the till at the end of the day. As it turns out, that initial legal target is irrelevant. Regardless of who hands over the coins, the market naturally reacts. To compensate, the final price the customer pays at the counter will naturally rise, and the net revenue the shop owner gets to keep will naturally fall. The financial burden of the tax is always shared organically between the buyer and the seller. The basic forces of the market easily override the legal mechanics of how the tax is collected. That exact same logic applies to your paycheck. In the labor market, labor is simply the product being sold, and your wage is its price. This chart shows the basic forces at play. You have the supply of available workers, the demand from employers, and they meet right in the middle at a natural baseline wage. Watch what happens when the government inserts the payroll tax into this established equilibrium. It acts like a physical wedge driven straight between supply and demand. The first immediate consequence of this wedge is that the total cost of labor, the gross amount the employer now has to pay, gets pushed upward. The second consequence happens simultaneously. The actual take-home pay that the worker receives gets pushed downward. This economic model illustrates the reality perfectly. The bracket labeled payroll tax clearly separates the elevated wage paid by the firm from the reduced wage received by the worker. Even though the law demands a 50-50 split, the market has mechanically driven a wedge into the system. Both the employer and the employee are forced to share the true cost through these altered wages. Economists formally call this phenomenon tax incidence. It is the vital distinction between the legal obligation to pay a tax and the actual economic suffering of bearing its cost. Lawmakers have the authority to decide whose name goes on the tax bill, but they lack the power to dictate who ultimately absorbs the loss. We see the political popularity of taxing corporations all the time. Yet the harsh economic reality is that everyday workers absorb those corporate costs anyway, usually through suppressed wages. When political rhetoric claims a new tax will selectively target one specific group without impacting the rest of the market, it's worth taking a closer look. Because in the ultimate battle between legislative decrees and market realities, the invisible laws of supply and demand always find the true payer.